So my name is Matt Harvey, and I work with CUB, or the Citizens Utility Board. And tonight we're going to be talking about how we can lower our cable bills. And then if we have time, I'll also include some slides about robocalls and how we can limit those, which I feel like I get basically 1 million a day at this point. So hopefully we'll have time for that. My internet has been a little spotty over the past like 2 weeks now. It's been pretty good today, but I'm going to go ahead and mute my video when I share my slides because it seems that when I have both going, my audio gets kind of weird. So while I'm presenting my slides, I'll have that gone, but still hear my voice. But if something sounds kind of off or weird about my voice or gets quiet, yell at me and we'll try to figure it out. But I think it should be good today. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and we can just jump right into it. Can everybody see these okay? I don't know. Can I get a thumbs up, making sure everybody can see these?
Oh, now I can.
Sweet. All right. Well, let's get into it. So before we dive into the fun stuff, I'm just going to go over who CUB is, what we do. So CUB, or the Citizens Utility Board, is a nonprofit organization that fights the utility companies here in Illinois. So if you were to give us like a title or a category, we're technically a nonpartisan, nonprofit, utility watchdog consumer advocacy group. It is a mouthful for sure, but it's really encompassing of what we do. We spend a lot of time representing you all as ratepayers in front of the various courts and commissions here in Illinois. And essentially what that means is whenever the utility companies attempt to raise their rates or pass some legislation that isn't very consumer friendly, we're the guys who go after them. So we're in your corner. So our MO is helping folks out. We have a hotline that you can call Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. If you have any questions related to cable, your electric bill, gas bill, solar panels, you name it, we cover it. And then that's that 1-800-669-5556 number. If there is one thing that you take away from my presentation today, let it be that you can call us at that hotline if you do need help. There's a lot of good folks staffing that hotline that are always willing to help. And they're great at helping folks navigate the various ebbs and flows of the utility markets because they can get complicated. We also have a website, citizensutilityboard.org, that you can visit that has all of the resources I'll be talking about today directly housed on there. And it also has a lot of other good stuff related to electric, gas, renewable energy, all that fun stuff. We have a bunch of good fact sheets and resources directly linked on our front page there on our website. So definitely be sure to check that out. I'm a part of the outreach department at CUB, and my primary responsibility, as well as just the entire department's entire responsibility, is to run around Illinois, meeting in rooms, virtual or in person like this one, to talk about utility related stuff. And there's a lot of it, but we do 500 events a year across the state. So again, we do them virtually and in person. And if you are interested in perhaps attending another workshop or another seminar in your community or neighboring community, or maybe you hear this and you're like, oh my goodness, my neighbor or my family member who lives in a different town needs to hear this as well. You can send them to our website, and we have a calendar link on the front page that they can click on, and then you can see the various events that we'll have in communities across Illinois. So another thing we have on our website are some media and publications our communications team puts together, which they are excellent resources for a variety of topics. But today I'm actually basing my presentation off 2 guides: the Guide to Cutting Cable TV Costs and the Guide to Fighting Robocalls. Those are on our website, but also if you registered for this, I don't know if folks put down their email, but if they did, I think I could work with Kelly to perhaps send those guides to her, and then she could send them out to whoever registers. I'll coordinate with Kelly to see if we can figure something out. And if we don't have your emails, perhaps you could put them in the chat at the end, and I could send that out to everybody. But that is what we do as a nonprofit. And I will say, as I go through this, it looks like we have a pretty full room, which is amazing. And normally I'll take questions as I go, but I think because there are so many folks in the room, let's just put questions in the chat. And then at the end, I'll save like 10, 15 minutes to answer questions folks might have. So please ask those questions as you go and just put them in the chat. And then again, we'll answer them near the end. So let's get into it. So we'll start with cable, and if we have time, we'll get into robocalls. But I think it's important to look at the average cable package here in Illinois. Most folks in this room probably have a cable bill that just makes you want to scream when you get it in the mail, right? Most cable bills are very expensive, and you're not alone. The average bill in the United States is about $200, the average cable bill. And what's included in that cable bill is 200 or more channels, which in theory sounds great. That is a lot of content that is included with that $200. However, we find that only folks are only watching 17 of those 200 channels. So in essence, you're paying $200 to watch 17 channels. It is pretty absurd. And a lot of times those channels don't even have all of the content you want to watch, right? It's just there's a few shows you might like. So you kind of list through all those packages that these cable companies are offering, or kind of thumb through them, trying to find the shows or the television stations that you want to watch. And then, of course, you get to sign up for a package that might have a handful of those, but then you have 150 or 200 other channels that you're not going to watch. And that's how they get you, is they try to get you into these very large packages that you end up paying a lot of money for to essentially just watch a handful of those channels. So there are a couple different ways that we can watch television here in Illinois. And I think every technology has pros and cons. There are, I mean, spoiler alert for the presentation, we are going to talk about streaming. Cub does think that streaming tends to be the most bang for your buck when it comes to television. But I think to be thorough, it's important to go through these different technologies and just assess what's good about them and what might not be so good about them. So the first one is over-the-air television. And over-the-air television is probably the oldest form of technology we'll talk about today. This is major networks that are delivered to your home via an antenna, like the one pictured on the right there. It's networks like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, WGN, essentially the local channels for this area. Pros are it is free. If you have the antenna, it is free to access this kind of television. Cons are that the choices can be limited. So again, you're only going to get a handful of those local channels, which in some cases, this might not be a con for some folks, and simplicity is bliss, I think, in some cases. So maybe that isn't a con, but you do have limited choices with this. And the reception can be unreliable or poor depending on weather. So if it's super windy out, maybe it's snowing or raining, that can impact the quality of the television you're receiving through that antenna. The next one is traditional cable. And this is probably what most folks in this room have. I was looking at the comments from the questions Kelly was asking, and she asked, what kind of TV services do folks have? And it seems like folks have a couple different ones, but it seems like overwhelmingly folks have traditional cable, which is very similar, or I should say the main driver of this slide here, this $200 bill for the 17 channels you're watching. This has a lot to do with traditional cable. Traditional cable is very expensive. But before we get into that, what is traditional cable? It's TV that's delivered to your home via a fiber optic or coaxial cable, which is the one pictured on the right here. Comcast, WOW, RCN, which WOW and RCN actually just merged to a company called Astound. I need to update my slides, but those companies are the companies that offer traditional cable here in Northern Illinois. Pros are you do get a lot of those channels. The 200 plus channels thing, that does relate to this traditional cable. So if you want a lot of channels, that could be a pro from this technology. The cons are is it is pretty expensive. It costs anywhere from $60 to $150 or more, and it isn't available everywhere. So folks in this particular area, New Lenox, you probably have access to traditional cable. However, if you go like an hour and a half west or south of Chicagoland, you run into some areas that might not have connection to traditional cable, or the infrastructure isn't in place for them to access that. The next one is telco TV. This is very similar to traditional cable, if not basically the same thing. The one difference is how it's delivered to your home. So with traditional cable, it's through that fiber optic or coaxial cable, whereas with telco, it's companies using telephone infrastructure to get the television service to your home, interestingly enough. So this is AT&T is one of the main companies that does this, and Verizon also offers a similar service. They use the fiber optic and or copper phone lines that, again, we use to receive telephone service here in Illinois. The pros are there are a ton of channels available to telco, just like traditional cable. And then the cons are it is expensive, and of course, it's not available everywhere. So folks in the more rural areas of our state might not have access to this. There is an option, though, for folks who do live out in the boonies who might not have access to this kind of stuff. They can do satellite TV, which, I probably sound like a broken record. A lot of these pros and cons are similar, but I think it's important to know because the technologies are a little bit different here. So satellite TV is TV that's delivered to your home via satellite, like the one picture on the left. Networks like DirecTV and Dish Network, the main culprits here. The pros and cons are very similar to telco and traditional cable, but it is slightly different. You do get a lot of channels, and it is available in rural areas. So if you really want traditional cable or something that's similar to that, and you don't have the infrastructure in your community, you can get satellite TV in order to access that kind of television. Cons are it is expensive, if not more expensive than traditional and telco television. It's anywhere from 70 to 150 or more dollars. And the reception can be poor because it is a satellite or similar to the over-the-air television antenna. So if it's like really rainy, really snowy, super windy, it's going to impact the quality of the television you're getting, if not canceling it out altogether. And it does require that satellite dish, which might be a con to some folks. They might not want to hook that thing up to the side of their home, which is understandable. Lastly, we have streaming services, which this is the new kid on the block. This is programming over the internet for a monthly subscription. So applications or companies like Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Netflix, Hulu, Sling TV. There's a bunch of them nowadays, and we'll go over some of these, but essentially this is where you pay a low subscription fee in order to access on-demand content through your television or through a streaming device, which is like in my mind, it's kind of like a DVD player, a Blu-ray player, but it's really, really small, and you don't put in a DVD. It just kind of plugs in these applications to your TV. You'd switch the input over to that particular device, turn the thing on, and then you'd be able to access these applications. So the pros are they do have very low subscription costs, especially when compared to cable. So it typically costs anywhere from $5 to $20 a month for these particular services. They do have a lot of content too. So there are thousands of choices when it comes to these applications in terms of movies, television, documentaries. It's a lot of content. So we're just kind of getting out of the pandemic here. And I just have streaming in my own home, and I feel like I have barely scratched the surface. And over the past 2 years, I've spent quite a bit of time at home. And my fiance and I have watched a lot of television, and we still feel like there's so much to watch, and we only subscribe to a handful of these services. So there is a lot of content. It's also customized programming, and this might sound slightly Orwellian, but essentially it's kind of watching what you're watching, I guess, in terms of learning the kind of content that you like to watch. So if you're somebody who's a real big fan of true crime documentaries, it's going to notice that, and then it's going to make recommendations to other true crime documentaries or similar TV shows. So that way, instead of having to like channel surf and like get recommendations from friends, the app kind of does that for you and builds that content in, which is kind of nice because you don't have to do a lot of detective work. You just have that stuff front and center when you log into the app. It's also really convenient to sign up online. The reason I add this as a pro is traditionally with cable, it's a real pain to get signed up for cable. You have to call the company. They need to come out and set up equipment. You have to sign these like sometimes 1 to 2 year contracts. Sometimes there's exit fees. It's a whole thing. Whereas with streaming, you can subscribe to one of these services, pay $5-10, watch the stuff for a month or two, and then you can cancel that subscription service. And that's it. There's no strings attached. It's very simple to sign up and exit the contract you have with these companies. It does have some cons, a lot of pros, but there are some cons. First one is that it does require internet. So you do need, I think it's 25 megabytes per second or higher is what Netflix recommends, which most folks who have internet nowadays in Illinois most likely exceed that speed. So if you're sitting here and you're watching me on your phone or your laptop or your iPad or whatever it might be, and you're not experiencing a loss in fidelity, you're probably good to stream too. So if you have internet to be on Zoom, you have internet to stream. It also requires smart television or a streaming device. So smart TVs are these newer televisions, like basically any television that you've bought over the past 10 to 5 years is probably a smart TV. These applications are actually built into the television menus. If you don't have a TV that has that as an option, then you would need to get a streaming device, which again, it's like a little USB sized thumb drive that you would plug into the back of your TV, and it acts essentially as like a DVD player where you switch the input and then you can watch the content. And I would say the biggest Achilles heel for streaming is live content. There is very limited live content. for streaming, it does exist, but it does get kind of expensive if you're looking to do like a sports replacement streaming service, or, you know, if you're trying to watch the news in real time, that can get kind of tricky, which I know that is something that a lot of folks want. And it is something that streaming hasn't quite figured out yet. Although there are some like news services, for example, like NBC just live streams their news service over YouTube. So you can watch it in real time on YouTube for free. So those are the different technologies. And before we get into streaming and why Cub thinks streaming is like one of the better ways to watch TV and one of the most cost-effective ways to watch TV, I think it's important to just tackle how we can cut our cable bill costs to begin with. Because then, you know, maybe you can reduce your cable bill to something that's manageable by using these tips. And if for some reason you can't, then we can use, you know, the streaming as kind of the frame of reference after this. So let's get into what we can do. And I kind of see this into two different steps, two different categories. There's first, before you call the cable company, so getting your ducks in a row to contact the cable company. And then of course there is calling the cable company, which I'm dealing with that. I've mentioned in the beginning, my internet has been super slow. So I've been calling Comcast, which I don't have cable through them. I have internet through them, but I don't look forward to contacting them because it is challenging to do the call and stuff. You need to have all your stuff squared away before you do it. So I think it's important to kind of get your ducks in a row before you call them, and then make the call once you have that information and data kind of compiled, so you're prepared for that conversation with the representative on the phone. So before you call the cable company, one of the first things that you should do is just look at your bill. Note all of the line items that you don't necessarily understand, or, you know, there's something on there and you're like, I'm being charged 10, 15 bucks a month for this. It's something for, you know, DVR equipment, and I don't know if I use that anymore. I threw it in the closet. Why am I still being charged for that? That's the kind of stuff you want to note. So you can go through that, and you might be able to just like send back that equipment and remove that monthly rental fee. Or there might be something that you can just like at the very least clear up with that company to get just some more information on why they're charging you that. You can also find hidden deals. And what I mean by that is that I'll use my own house as an example. We just have streaming, we just have internet through Comcast. And if I were to go online and search current Comcast deals or contracts, it's going to spit out a suite of contracts that's designed specifically for me as an existing customer, because it knows that I'm using Comcast internet when Googling. How it does that, I'm not too sure. It's something to do with your IP address, but they do know it because you're using their internet to look up this stuff. However, if I were to use my smartphone, for example, and turn off my Wi-Fi and search current contracts for Comcast customers, it would spit out an entire different set of contracts for new customers. That would also happen if you went over to a friend's house who has AT&T instead of Comcast, for example. It would, you know, spit out new customer contracts for the Comcast, you know, customers. You could do it if you went to the library, perhaps. And it's important to do this because when you're negotiating with the cable companies, you want to know what they're charging new customers, because you can, you know, say, look, you're charging me double what a new customer is paying. Why shouldn't I switch to a different company? Or can you give me a bone here and just reduce it? I want to be a current customer or an existing customer for another cycle. But unfortunately, these cable companies tend to prefer new customers for whatever reason. So it is challenging to kind of navigate that. But I think it's a nice tool to have in your tool belt when you're doing the negotiation with that particular company. The next one is finding out what the current competition charges. It's a very similar vein to finding those hidden deals. Essentially, when you do, you know, the searching or the research, trying to figure out what the other companies are charging, they'll spit out new customer rates. And then when you're on the phone with Comcast, you can say, look, AT&T is charging, you know, this amount of money. It's 10, 20 bucks, 30 bucks cheaper. Why shouldn't I switch to them? And that way, hopefully you can kind of negotiate down your bill, and they might be willing to throw you a bone because they know you're kind of threatening to cancel or looking at your options. So that's important information to have before you make that call. Now, when you're ready and you have all of that info one place, it's time to get on the phone with the cable company. So the first thing you want to do is to request the cancellation/retention department. The cancellation or retention department exists to retain your service. So if you just call the 1-800 number and you just get on with the first person that'll talk to you, most likely that is going to be somebody in the sales department who's going to try to upcharge you or upsell you or get you on a new contract. Whereas if you can get a hold of the retention department, they're going to be more willing to work with you, especially when you're like, look, I'm with AT&T and I'm going to switch to Comcast because I see that they're charging customers $30 less for a very similar package. They're going to be the folks that are going to wheel and deal with you to try to reduce that bill and retain your service. Of course, golden rule applies to all things in life, in my opinion, but it does apply here. Be kind, but be firm. Nobody likes a jerk. So it's very challenging to not be a jerk on the phone with these folks. I can attest because I'm dealing with this myself. It's very frustrating, but keep your cool because they're going to be more willing to work with you and give you a better deal if you're just kind to them. Of course, you don't want to be afraid to ask for a better deal. That's why we're calling. We want to reduce our bill, and you don't want to get upsold. So they might say, well, we can keep your costs the same, but we'll throw in some HBO for free for a year or something like that. Or if you just pay $10 extra, you'll get some additional channels or whatever. We're calling to reduce the bill, not to increase it. So try not to get tricked and get upsold on some of these packages they're offering. Also, be open to locking it in. So if you're somebody who's going to be in the same residence for a couple of years or a year or two, might be worthwhile offering, signing a contract like, hey, if you can give me a pretty cheap rate, I'm willing to stick around for 2 years or 3 years or whatever it might be if you can lock that in. So that might be worthwhile offering. Then, of course, take notes. Stuff happens. People are human. Sometimes you talk to the person on the phone and something's supposed to happen. You get your first bill and it's not there. And you're like, what the heck? It's important to have a note of who you spoke with and what you spoke about. Because that way, if you need to call back, you don't need to kind of try to figure out what they actually promised. It's right there on pen and paper or whatever in a Word document on your computer. So that way you can make sure you're getting what was agreed upon on the phone. And then lastly, this is not necessarily related to all of this, but I think, typically when you have a cable bill, oftentimes it's bundled with an internet and phone bill. So in terms of just cutting that cable bill or that general package, you can buy your own modem, which a modem is the way that you receive internet in your own home. So typically it's like a modem, it's hooked up to a router, and then the router gives Wi-Fi to your various devices, but the modem is the way you're getting internet from the outside. So a lot of these companies charge you rental fees for their modem and router combos. So it's anywhere from $10 to $20. I think typically it's about $20. And they charge that in perpetuity. So you could be with AT&T or Comcast and you could be renting that modem for 10 years and pay $20 every month for 10 years. And you don't get to own that equipment outright. However, if you're a Comcast customer, you can buy your own modem and router. They cost anywhere from $100 to $200 on the high end, combining both of them together, both prices together. So it does get a little expensive, but if you think about it, there's a return on investment there. After 10 or 12 months, a year, you're going to have a sunk cost, because instead, if you were renting it through one of these companies, it's in perpetuity. So you're just spending that money forever. So within 10 months, most likely you're going to recoup the cost of a modem. AT&T does not allow you to buy your own modem, which is a very unfortunate. We tried passing some legislation that required them to let you own your own modem. And if you did rent the modem and router, that you would be able to own it after paying for the cost of it. Unfortunately, surprise, surprise, it did not pass. But we're still working on stuff like that. We actually have a fact sheet that we put together that details how you can go about buying your own modem and router and what that looks like. So I'll be sure to include that in the email I'll send out to everybody with the 2 other guides as well. So let's get into streaming. If you're like, Matt, I've done all this stuff before, I still have a very high cable bill. I call them every time my contract's up. They cut out $10, but it's still $200 or $190, whatever it is. What do I do? My suggestion to you would be to look into just giving up cable altogether and switching to streaming. So what do you need to stream? We talked about this a little bit, but I'll give you some just kind of more concrete examples here. You need a smart television, which looks a little like this. Again, it's like any newer television within the past 8 years or so. It's most likely a smart television, so it has the streaming apps built in already. But if you don't have a TV that's equipped to do that, you can get a smart streaming device, or excuse me, just a streaming device, which there are a couple different kinds. This is a Roku. So you can see it's just a little USB drive that hooks into the back of your television, has a remote. Apple TV is another one, which is a slightly bigger than the Roku, but it's basically just like a square box about the size of like a coaster that hooks up to your television, and then you have the remote with it. Fire Stick, very similar to the Roku. And then if you're a Comcast customer, they have a free one that you can get. It's called the Xfinity Flex. It's about the size of a coaster. It's a bit thicker than that, but width, I suppose, is about the size of a coaster. And you can get this for free if you're a Comcast subscriber, which, some of these cost 30 to 50 bucks, but why not get it for free if you don't already have one? Or you can hook it up to another television if you want to kind of put these streaming services on different TVs. That's another pro that I keep thinking that I need to add to the list when I first talk about it, but I never do. And next presentation I give, it'll be there, I hope. But when you have streaming, you are allowed a couple different extra screens to stream on. So you could put a streaming device on your main television. You could put it on a television, perhaps like in the basement, in a bedroom, maybe in another bedroom. So that way you can have streaming in multiple places across your home, but you would need multiple streaming devices in order to do that, or they would all need to be smart TVs. But ultimately you can use one login, one subscription fee for multiple TVs in your home. And you do need a wireless internet connection as well. But I think most folks who are joining today are probably good with that because you're joining via Zoom. Whoops. There we go, getting lost in my slides here. So there are a couple different categories of streaming services. Don't get too lost in the text. I pulled this just right from our streaming guide or our cutting the cable guide. I just like to use it just as like an example of how many streaming services are out there, but don't worry too much about exactly what this says because it is a wall of text. But there are a couple different categories of streaming services, and this is the basic services. This is kind of you need some of these for the non-negotiable services to make streaming make the most sense. I think Netflix and Hulu are two of the biggest ones. You definitely need either both of those or one of those because they have a good chunk of the content that you can watch via streaming. And I know Disney Plus, we added in there because it's becoming a bit more popular. And it also comes with this package where you can get Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus all for about 14 bucks. So they're kind of working their way to being this like non-negotiable service because you get so much with it. And then Amazon Prime Video is also a big one. And if you subscribe to Amazon to get package delivery, you also have their Prime Video for free through that subscription. So you might already have this. But these are some of the main streaming services that folks have. And then you have specialized streaming services. What I mean by this is these are streaming services that you might not subscribe to like year round. Whereas with Netflix, you probably want it year round. However, with these, you could pick these streaming services to watch specific TV shows. For example, HBO Max has a show that my fiance and I really like. We were big fans of Game of Thrones. There was a spinoff that just came out a couple months ago. We resubscribed to HBO Max for a couple months to watch House of the Dragon, the spinoff show. And then once we finished it, we ended our streaming subscription with HBO Max. And then we actually just re-upped it to watch another show. But that's how this kind of stuff works. These specialized services, you pay as much as you're watching that content. So if there's a couple shows you want to watch, you keep paying that subscription service. And then when you're ready to be done, you can just end it and pick it back up when you're ready to watch the new season of whatever's coming out. There's also stuff like Acorn TV, which is for international television. So this is kind of in the category of getting content that you might not normally be able to get through something like Netflix. And then lastly, we have cable replacement streaming services. These are live television streaming services, and there's a couple good ones like Philo and Sling TV act very similarly to cable, but they're pretty affordable. So like Philo is $25 a month, Sling TV is 30 to 50 bucks a month. But some of them get super expensive. So you look at DirecTV Stream, which is the very first one on the chart here, $70 to $150 a month for that live on-demand content, which is starting to look pretty darn similar to cable in terms of price and what it's offering. So you need to be careful with these live TV streaming services, but they do exist. So just to be thorough, we like to include them in there. Another way you can supplement your cable service is using streaming, but then also using a digital antenna or an HD TV antenna, which is what it's pictured on the left there. It's a very small indoor antenna that you can put, on the top of your television in a windowsill. It's like basically the same thing as rabbit ears. It's just the fidelity tends to be better. There are a couple of things you need to know about an HD TV antenna. Of course, it's over-the-air television, like the very first technology we talked about. So this would get you those like handful of local channels. But if you got rid of rabbit ears a long time ago and you're like, I don't even remember what channels I have access to, you can find out through a couple of these different links that are listed on the first note here. The FCC has a really good tool where you can search your address and see what channels are available to you, and then what your reception would be for those channels, because it depends geographically what you have access to. And then, how strong the connection is depends on where you're located as well. Being around New Lenox, you're probably fine because you're close to Chicago. A lot of these will probably have strong signals, but might be worthwhile looking into. TV Fool and Antenna Web are also good resources for this stuff too. So you can kind of like see what FCC says, and then you can go to these other resources to make sure it checks out. You also want to make sure you have the right television. So a digital tuner is needed. I hesitate to put this in the presentation because I think most TVs, I would guess like 98% of the televisions we have nowadays have digital tuners built in. So all TVs built after 2006 have digital tuners, are required to have them by law. And then even prior to 2006, the majority of televisions that were being built had them put inside. So most televisions are covered. You also want to make sure you have the right type of antenna. There's a couple different kinds. You have omnidirectional and directional. So omnidirectional is for somebody who lives very close to the signal, which again, you can check that by visiting the fcc.gov's link. And if you're very close to the signal and it's right next to you, you could do with an omnidirectional, meaning that you're pulling the signal from a little bit of everywhere. I live in Chicago. I live in Logan Square. So if I were to do this, I would probably get an omnidirectional one. Whereas if you live a distance away from the signal, you would want a directional, because then you can point the antenna towards that signal essentially. Amplified versus non-amplified is pretty similar conceptually. If you're further away from the signal, you want amplified, but if you're pretty close, you don't need an amplified, and you could do with a non-amplified. And then indoor is totally fine. They're cheaper and not as like, I don't know the word I'm looking for, not invasive, for lack of a better word. It's nothing you're installing on the side of your home. And they're a bit cheaper, whereas outdoor might have a bit better signal, but you would need to install this antenna outside of your home. Being where you all are probably calling in from, you're probably more than fine with an indoor antenna. They typically cost, like a pretty good one's about $30. You can get them at Target, Walmart, Best Buy. You can go on Amazon and get them as well. The one that we have in the Cub office looks pretty similar to this. So we do have one in the Cub office that we use just to get like the local channels and local news. And it just sits in a windowsill, and it's about the size of an iPad, a bit smaller even. And it's, we just put it in the windowsill and it works totally fine. So I did some back of the napkin cutting your TV related costs, just to kind of give folks a ballpark of what it would cost to switch over to streaming and to cut your cable. So we have on the left column the items that we would be getting or subscribing to, the middle column's the startup cost, and then there's the monthly cost in the far right column. So in this like kind of back of the napkin hypothetical example, we'll say that you're getting the HD TV antenna, which costs about $30. And then you would also, let's say you don't have a smart TV, so you need a streaming device. And then you get the most expensive Roku you can get, which is $50. So that comes out to $80 for the equipment alone. Then we look at the monthly cost of these subscription services. I put what I currently have. And again, I feel like I have more than enough content with this stuff. I have Netflix, which is $15. I'm watching HBO Max currently, so I have $10 for that. And then we also do the Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN package, which is $14. That comes out to $38.97 as our monthly cost. So altogether, it's about like $100 to $120 to start up. But then after that, just for TV alone, if you just have these streaming services, it's about $40. every month. So if you're somebody who's paying $150 to $200 for cable, you can cut that down by $100 or $150 a month. And then arguably switching over to these streaming services, you probably have even more content than you have through like traditional cable. It's pretty wild how much money you can save just by looking at streaming. So I think it's pretty worthwhile to explore this if you haven't already. And maybe you already have some of these streaming services, but you just, you're a bit wary of giving them up because you want to watch sports or whatever. There are some ways that you can kind of compensate for watching sports. For example, I had some roommates who were really into the NFL. They like watching football, and we didn't have cable, so they bought something called I think it was called the season pass or the season ticket, something along those lines. And I think they paid about $150 for it. But then they got to watch all of the football they wanted to watch for the entire season. And instead of paying $150 a month for cable, they just paid a one-time fee to get access to that stuff. So it's worth doing a little detective work to see if you can make this make sense, because you could save quite a bit of money year in and year out. So that being said, one last thing I want to mention before we move to robocalls. It looks like we're doing pretty good on time, so I should have enough time to go over the robocalls here. But I want to mention that the Affordable Connectivity Program is an income qualified program that is available to folks here in Illinois. Gives you a discount of up to $30 per month on your internet bill, $75 if you're on qualifying tribal lands. They also give you a one-time discount of $100 to purchase a laptop, computer, or tablet. It's an income qualified program, but if you're somebody who doesn't know if you can do streaming because you're not sure you can afford the internet cost, and you might be income qualified for it, it's worth looking into because you can get access to the internet without having to pay a lot for it. So it's a really good program that helps folks get access to this. So if you qualify for, LIHEAP, energy assistance, or like maybe food stamps or something like that, you also qualify for the ACP. So strongly encourage folks who think they might qualify to check it out and see if they can get this put on their already existing internet bill, or maybe this would allow you to start your internet service and get plugged in. So something to think about. So that being said, I'm going to go into robocalls. I'll try to keep this kind of brief because I know folks were mostly here for cable. It looks like there are a lot of questions. So maybe we can, let's answer some questions now about cable, and then we'll see how long that takes. And then if we have some leftover time, we'll go into robocalls. How does that sound for everybody? I don't know, Kelly, if that checks out for you and that makes sense. Cool, people are saying good in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, so that way I can turn on my video while I'm answering some questions. And then again, if we have some time here, we'll go into robocalls, but I'll also send out the robocall guide as well if we don't have time, so folks can have that in one place. But there is a lot of stuff going on in the chat, so I'm going to scroll back here to make sure I have the first question. Video is optional, a lot of background noise. I just saw the message about background noise. I'm sorry, that might have been my internet, but I couldn't see the chat at the time. Scrolling through here. All right, I think I found the first question. Sorry that took me so long. I had to kind of dig through some of the stuff here. Does remote for the Xfinity Flex have voice control? Is what somebody asked. And yes, it does. I actually have, you can see that TV behind me. I have Xfinity Flex there because it's not a smart TV. We have like a main television out in our entertainment center in our living room, where it is smart TV and we can just do the streaming through that. However, in this room, I just use the Xfinity Flex, and it has a remote that is voice controlled that makes it a bit easier to use. And then it says, do you need an antenna for each TV? So if you were looking into the digital antenna, yes, you would need to get a digital antenna for each television you were hoping to, stream, or not stream, but watch those local channels over. So you would need to get one for each TV. And then if you use the streaming services, how would you watch local news and channels like History and Discovery? Asked Gail. So that's a good question. So if you did streaming, local news you could get through the HD TV antenna or the digital antenna. However, shows like the History Channel or Discovery Channel, you'd have to see what streaming services host their content. So I think like Hulu has some of that content as well. A lot of times these streaming services will make partnerships with those particular channels to then put up the television shows that they regularly host on the streaming services. So you'd have to kind of look around. I know our Cutting the Cable guide has some of that info under the particular streaming services, but you might need to go onto like Google to see exactly where those channels are housed in streaming. Okay. I think I went through all the questions, and it looks like we might have some time for robocall too. I just saw 15 messages in my thing and I wasn't able to look at them while I was presenting. So I was worried that we had 15 questions, but I think we only had a couple. Does anybody have any additional questions before we go into robocall? Cool. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and dive into robocall, and then we'll do the same thing near the end of that. If folks have any questions, I'll be sure to stick around and answer them. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Let me know. It sounds like I was looking through some messages that my sound had some like background buzzing. If that's still happening, please let me know, and I'll see if I can like fiddle with my mic or something. Oh, we have one more question. How is YouTube TV? I don't personally have it, but I know some folks really do like it. But it is a little expensive. I think it's like $60, $65. So if you're getting YouTube TV and you're coupling it with something like Netflix, that can get slightly expensive. So something to be mindful of. All right, let's get into robocalls here. I'll try to be quick with this one. So robocalls. What is a robocall? Robocall is my screen's freaking out here. There we go. A pre-recorded message from computer-generated dialers. So I know folks on this call probably get 1,000,001 of these calls. I get, feels like 10 a day on my cell phone nowadays. And it makes sense because Illinois ranks rather high in the nation for number of robocalls received. So here in Illinois, as of December, this data hasn't been calculated yet for January. So this is just December of 2022 data. But 174 million robocalls were placed in December alone here in Illinois. So it is quite a bit. So to get even more macro with that data, 4.3 billion robocalls were estimated to be made here in the United States alone, which averages out to about 13 calls per person a month, which feels, again, I feel like I get 13 a day. So it feels like it's much more. It's 1,600 a second, 5.7 million an hour, and 137 million a day. So there are a lot of robocalls being placed every single day or being made every day. So a lot of folks wonder, are robocalls legal? It's tricky. They are legal as long as they're not sales calls, unless they have written permission from the Federal Trade Commission. So some companies can get that permission from the FTC to do the solicitations over phone, but it's rare that they get that. There are some good pre-recorded messages or robocalls, though. So things like information calls, calls from debt collectors, politicians during the campaign cycle, healthcare providers, if they're, trying to remind you of an appointment, or if you have a prescription you need to pick up, they can use robocalls legally to notify you. And that makes sense, right? That seems to be the original idea of robocalls, is to really help us out. But unfortunately, it seems like the majority of these robocalls that we get are from telemarketers or just pure scams, which we can see that looking at robocalls by category. Over 50% of the robocalls by category come from either telemarketing or scams, whereas 26% come from alerts and reminders, and then about 16% come from payment reminders. So overwhelmingly, they're coming from people trying to sell stuff or people conducting scams, which scams are a big deal. They happen pretty regularly to a lot of just average Americans across the country. 1 out of 10 Americans are scammed every single year, which nets at a $9.5 billion loss. Looking at Illinois alone, there are 79,954 reported fraud cases, which resulted in an annual loss of $133 million. So even here at home, we're really experiencing a lot of folks, getting ripped off by these scammers who are using robocalls as the main technology here. There was an act that was passed at the end of 2019 called the Trace Act, which is the Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act. That passed in 2019, and essentially what it did is it gave more resources to law enforcement to go after these scammers. So it extended the statute of limitations, meaning that it's hard to find these kinds of scammers, so it takes law enforcement an extended period of time to do that. So sometimes it would take them so long that due to statute of limitations, they couldn't charge these scammers. But because of the Trace Act, they extended that so they have more time to go after them. It increases the penalties. And then it also requires phone companies to validate calls. So if you get a scam call on your cell phone nowadays, they have these call filters essentially built into the smartphones where it filters them out and then flags them as, a scam call or a robocall. The latest scams we know about at Cub, there's a couple. First one is the IRS and Social Security scams, which these seem as old as time itself at this point. There's the Say Yes scams, which this is where they get you to, they'll say, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And they want you to say yes, because if they're selling something, what they can do is attempt to stitch together that audio, and they have you saying yes to basically authorize whatever they're trying to do. So you want to watch out for those. And then electric and gas companies. This one hits pretty close to home. Being at Cub, we work on a lot of these kind of complaints and issues that folks deal with these particular companies. They're called alternative retail electric and gas suppliers. They basically pretend that, in some cases, they pretend that they're just like ComEd or People's Gas or Ameren, Nicor, and they'll say, look, I'm with the energy company, switch over to my particular service and we'll save you some money, or we're running a promotion, or some kind of like renewable energy reduction, something along those lines. And they try to get you to switch over, and then they end up charging you more than what your default utility is charging. So you want to be careful with that. Oftentimes the utility, if they do need to contact you, they'll just send you a letter in the mail. They won't necessarily call you. Another little pro tip is that if you pick up the phone and there is a 2 to 3 second delay, 9 out of 10 times it's a recorded call. So if you pick up the phone, you say hello, nobody answers, it might be worthwhile hanging up. And if somebody just didn't get the chance to answer in time or whatever, they'll call back or they'll leave a voicemail. So of course, do not answer any questions, especially yes or no questions, with this say yes scam that's been going around. Most folks are probably wondering at this point, can you stop robocalls? And again, it's complicated because there's not necessarily a silver bullet to stop these robocalls completely, but there are a few ways that we can reduce them. So of course, don't answer unknown numbers. That's a big one. Use your voicemail. I'm going to be a broken record about voicemail for the next few minutes because I think it is probably the best tool we have to reduce robocalls at this point. If somebody's calling you and it seems kind of sketchy, you can hang up, and if they call back, they'll leave a voicemail, and that way you can better suss out exactly what's going on. You can really use that as a tool to limit some of this stuff that's happening. And then, of course, if you do answer a robocall, hang up immediately and be sure not to follow any instructions they're giving you. So we have 4 steps that you can use to reduce your robocalls. The first one is confirming that you're on the do not call list, which you can call this 888-382-1222 number to confirm if you're on the list, or you can go to donotcall.gov. I believe you need to re-up your activation with this service every once in a while. So if you haven't done it in a while, it might be worth calling or checking to see if you're on that do not call list, which again, the FTC has this, so they stop the telemarketers for calling you that do get the written permission. Use your voicemail. I'll spare you my rant again on that, but I think that's a pretty important piece of this puzzle of reducing how many robocalls you get. And then you can also see what your phone can do for you. So I'm going to skip this for cell phones, but landlines have a couple options. So you have voicemail, of course, call blocking devices, which these are randomly generated numbers most of the time. So blocking a specific number most likely isn't going to help you. But if you do notice that there is a number that keeps calling you, you could subscribe to one of these services to block that number, but they are super expensive for landlines, 70 to 80 bucks. So I don't know if that's worth it, but it is out there. It is an option. AT&T also has the Star 60 service, which comes at $11 a month and blocks only up to 10 numbers from a local area. So if you notice it's from a local number, You could do that. Digital phones, so this is like AT&T's Uverse, Comcast Xfinity, those internet phones that you get through the the internet and cable packages. Also have some options. So they do have a few star codes, kind of like the AT&T Star 60 service. So you can contact your provider or go online to see what they have to offer. And Comcast and AT&T both have call blocking services that can be activated from your online account. So you would need to go to your respective online account for each of these services, and then you can access the call blocking through the through the online portal. Cell phones also have some really good options. So AT&T has Call Protect, Sprint has Premium Caller ID, T-Mobile has Scam ID, Scam Block, and Name ID. And then lastly, Verizon has Call Filter. So, there are some options on your cell phone. A lot of times these are already built into your phone. They're already activated if you have a cell phone, but it's worthwhile to just double check to make sure that this is activated by going into your settings or searching for these apps. And lastly, you can see what third-party services are available if you do have a cell phone. These are a couple of the ones that we know of: Hiya Caller ID and Block, Nomorobo, RoboKiller, Truecaller, and Umail. So, your cell phone does a lot of this for you, but they do have these applications that you can tap into that might help you better filter some of the calls to some of the stuff that might get missed by your cell phone's feature. Perhaps could be filtered by an additional application that's running in the background. So these are a couple of these. And of course, we mentioned all of this in the guide, which I'll send out. So all the information that I talked about today will be directly housed in those guides I'll send out. So if you need some kind of follow-up, or you're scratching your head when you're thinking about this stuff and you're like, what's that thing Matt mentioned? Hopefully you'll be able to go back to the guide and see what that is. Or you can always call Cub or contact me, Matt, at mharvey@citizensutilityboard.org. I'm always happy to chat or just answer any questions you might have over email. So with that being said, I will stop sharing my screen here. I will turn on my video and I will see if there are any additional questions. It looks like we have a few minutes to answer them. Let me move up here in the chat box. Email. All right, so sorry, just navigating this slide. So the first question, can you please email all the slides from Cutting Cable presentation robocalls? I will definitely include those with the guides that I'm sending out. Let's see what else. What about calls that display fake names and numbers? So that is pretty tricky. So a lot of times they're using these pre-recorded numbers that oftentimes use a similar area code to where you live. So a lot of the ones I grew up in Lake County in Illinois, so I'll get 847 phone calls that, kind of mimic the area that you're living in, which gets kind of tricky because you're wondering, well, is this just a friend or a neighbor or an old family or an old friend or something like that who has a similar number and they just got a new number? It's hard to track that down. So that is one of the more tricky parts about the calls that are being made, is they can spoof your area code. Let's see, what else do we have? You will not receive a phone call from the IRS. You receive documentation via snail mail, says Don. That is a very good thing to point out. Most important services organizations will contact you via mail. They're not going to call you. So that's always a good rule of thumb. Mary Ellen says, many show your area code, so you may think it's a local call, you may know. 100%, we just talked about that. And then, is it worth it to press 1 to be removed from this list? I always think they sell my number once they validate it. That is a good question, Kathy. I am not too sure. I think if it is a robocall, the best thing to do is just to hang up. That way you don't get kind of mixed into the whole mess of having your number traded throughout these different companies. And then Mary Ellen, what about using your phone screening options? Yes, I think using the screening options that you have available via your phone, regardless of the kind of technology you're using, makes a lot of sense, because that way you can just see, if I get a scam call on my cell phone, my screen will basically show up bright red and it'll say scam risk. And that way I know I can just send the call right to voicemail, and I don't have to pick that up and try to determine whether or not it's a robocall or somebody we know. Then there's a question out of curiosity. Oh, that's for the chat. Some folks still have landlines. And then Tina has, can I ask a quick cable related question? My internet and cable are bundled. You mentioned monthly prices for streaming. Do you know approximately how much the average internet bill is independent of cable? It depends quite a bit, but I would say anywhere from like $30 to $70, depending on the speed of the internet you're subscribing to. So I have a gigabyte internet, which is 1,000 megabytes per second, and I pay $60 in my home for it. Whereas I was helping my folks out, they live up in Antioch. They needed to renegotiate their internet package, and they're getting, I think, about 500 megabytes per second for $40. So it varies quite a bit what they're offering, but it's really important if you are looking to just get internet instead of cable, to see what everybody's offering so you can compare and contrast costs. Looks like a new question just came in. I changed my voicemail message to say, if you don't leave a message, I'll assume you're a scam and we'll block you. I know, seems a bit harsh. I think that's a great idea, Kathy. You know, it's a good way to ward off some of those scammers for sure. All right. Does anybody have any additional questions before we wrap up tonight? And Kelly, I don't know, when folks registered for this, did they leave their emails?
Yes, we have the ability to reach out to our registrants. The library does protect all of your information, so we can't share that directly, but I can forward all of the information.
Perfect. I think I have your info in our database here when we set it up, so I'll just like send you the note and then we can send it out to folks. And I'll also include my contact information. So if folks want to chat about this in more detail, I'm more than happy to hop on the phone or chat via email. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate your time. I hope everybody stays warm out there. And again, check out our website and see some of those resources on there, or maybe check out another event we have in your community coming up.